Hello and welcome to another DPO advice from Steve. This is a bit more of a formal one. We're covering proxy access to medical records in England for English GPs. Okay, and so this is targeted at GPs specifically, although there's information here that others may find interesting. There's another recording on proxy access and access to records, which is a bit more informal, you may find more useful. So, first, I think we need to outline what we're going to talk about. What's proxy access, how patients, parents, carers can request it, a suggested process for GPs for accessing these things. It's not set in stone, you can do it how you wish. Time limits we should be applying to having proxy access, what to do at patients without capacity, some challenges and safety issues, and obviously where to get advice. It says Q&A on this slide, but you can't ask any questions, but you can put them in the conversation under the YouTube and I'll try to answer them. So what is proxy access? Well, basically, a person can give access to their medical records to other people. That can be used for a lot of purposes, but you can do things like that list there: request and manage prescriptions, view test results, and also even access detailed medical records. Why do we need it? Well, commonly it's just convenient. An adult couple, say, one of them may be working shifts, it may be different to contact the surgery, so therefore giving proxy access makes life easier. Often it's used for children because the child's a patient under 11. It means that we can have electronic access to their records. Where a patient has communication difficulties or the patient lacks competence, so they've had some mental impairment, for example, or are unable to actually access and manage their medical records for themselves. There's two ways to get proxy access. One we do not recommend, which is informal. Basically, that is password sharing. Somebody gives their password to their NHS account to another person, that person uses it. The reason we don't recommend that is because it's not that safe. You can have issues with things like the patient having the other person having excess access to the record, but also it's hard to get rid of. Basically, because you can always reset the password of the NHS account, if you've given your password to someone else, commonly you'll have to delete the NHS account and recreate it to actually remove that access. So please bear that in mind and go through the formal route if you're a patient, preferably. So basically, formal proxy access, you apply to the practice vets the request, ensures safety, and makes sure it's removed at certain ages if it's a child, to protect the child's privacy, or when requested by the patient. Bear in mind that we're not going to discuss the informal access route, but it does exist, but it shouldn't be used for preference. So, who can ask for proxy access? Well, any adult patient or a child over 11 can ask directly for someone to be their proxy. Okay, parents can ask on behalf of their children. But children over 11, which is the age at which GILIC competence is normally achieved, must be asked for their consent. Practice can set limits on how long this applies for. NHS guidance says you should remove the proxy access at certain points. Okay, and the child themselves can renew it after it's been removed if they so wish. The other kind of group is carers for persons without capacity, where they either have a deputyship for health and welfare or lasting power of attorney from the Court of Protection. There are a few old lasting powers of attorney that are not signed by the Court of Protection hanging around, but most of those have now either expired or the persons who had granted the LPA are no longer with us. Someone with care in a professional capacity can obviously ask, because it's important that they can access the patient's data in order to make sure they're given the correct care. And commonly care homes will ask, and they'll generally use a single proxy account for the residents rather than using informal proxy routes. How can people ask? Well, there's an NHS online system, but it's been in beta for a little while now and it's limited to a very small number of practices. That basically just sends an email with the request to the practice, which includes verification of the person asking, who is the proxy. People can ask for email letter to the practice. Practices commonly have web forms, and you can set up a web form if you're a practice in any way that you require, and they can always ask in person. Bear in mind, proxy access isn't a legal right in the same way as, say, subject access right is, but so we can implement it in any manner that makes sense, but we shouldn't be trying to make it block it or make it difficult. It's important that patients have access to this route. So, a suggested process then. So first of all, we need to vet the proxy. Make sure that the patient is not being exploited, abused, coercively controlled. Coercive control is illegal in the UK, but it does still happen. Please bear in mind, okay, that you need to look very carefully at this, because giving someone else access to the patient's record gives them an awful lot of power. We should also check for safeguarding, particularly with children, okay, make sure that no one's going to be put at risk by the access. If they're competent, make sure that the patient is fully aware of the access being granted. Okay. If they're not competent, then the access must have been agreed by an appropriate person, which would be a parent for a child, deputy for health and welfare, someone with last priority, social worker, etc., etc. Don't grant access if you believe there is risk. As I say, it's a privilege, not a right. So we do not have to take big risks here. The next thing to do is decide the access level. Now, what we should always be looking is to restrict access to the minimum needed. That's just basic data minimization, data protection, the data protection principle 4. Okay. Generally, if we're allowing full notes access, we'll have to be careful to redact notes. Say, for example, a couple have got access to each other's records. You possibly don't want certain things to be exposed to each other, which would affect their privacy. So therefore, you may have to take more care with marking things during consultations as not being viewable online. Hence, notes access is always a bit problematic, particularly with adults. We can decide what level. Okay, they can request the level they want, but it's our decision as to what level we provide. Bear in mind that access is always logged. It's done automatically in all the major practice systems, EMIS TPP. So we can review if we have concerns later, and we can also change the access level at any time. When we're doing this, okay, it's very, very important to make sure that we don't mess up patient lists. So if the person who is being given the proxy is not a patient at the practice, or if they are doing this in a professional capacity, that is, they're a carer, even if they are a patient at the practice, you must create a new record for them without an NHS number. Now, the reason for that is simply because if you put an NHS number in it, it will automatically move the patient to your practice and it will affect practice numbers. That won't be what you want. The reason for professionals is quite simply because they need to separate their personal and their professional lives. You really don't want to have access to patients when you move on from a different role. So that's why you need separate accounts for them. If none of those are true, the other person is a patient at the practice and they're not doing this special capacity, then yes, you can use the existing patient record. What does it look like? These screenshots are taken from a NHS England publication, and so I can't guarantee the veracity, but these are from EMIS. So basically, you go to the online, you go to registration, online services, add online user, add proxy user. Use the normal trace box to find the proxy. Obviously, you have to create them first. Okay. Confirm identity verification and add what identification you saw. So either an identity document, personal vouching, or the other one is information confirmation. You'll use that if they came in via the NHS app, or if you're using something like a registered email address. That's how you'd identify them there, and just put in what in that information confirmation what you did. Choose their relationship, okay, and then select the allowed services. Now, as you can see here, you've got a range of things. Appointments, prescription, demographics, detail coded record. With some situations, you may want to think very carefully what you're offering here. So, for example, a set of parents who are not living with each other, only one of them is living with the child, both may want access to the medical records of the child. However, giving access to demographics or appointments may be not in the best interest of the child or one of the parents, because that parent may be at risk in a domestic violence situation or something like that. The separation was caused by that. So we have to be cautious here. Bear in mind, okay, that for most patients, being able to actually see the detailed coded record is probably a bit more than actually is wanted. So just bear that in mind. Okay. You then need to add a legal basis. Okay, generally it's going to be consent, but obviously there are other legal bases, so you need to add that. Okay, and you should also set up, you should inform the patient and the proxy that you've set this up, and possibly set up a reminder to review the access. So, time limits for proxy access. Children are the biggest area here, okay? If parents have proxy access for children, that should be reviewed regularly. It's recommended to remove proxy access, that is remove, not just review, at between 13 and 14. That is because basically the child can ask for it to be re-added, and the child needs to give consent. This gives the child the opportunity to have the discussion or to actually refuse without them having to do anything that someone may find difficult. So effectively, this is the point at which we really start to consider the child's privacy. Bear in mind that a lot of this law comes from the Gillett case, which was all about a child's privacy to have sexual health information. So let's be very, very careful here and make sure that when we re-add it, okay, we are careful with what we do, and the child is granted the right to manage their own data. It's always their data. We can always consider safeguarding issues in the child's best interest. With adults with a lasting power of attorney, you need to consider whether what competencies, or a deputyship actually, you need to consider if competence is likely to return. So a common thing for this is brain injury, where basically a patient may not be competent for a year or two while they recover from a brain injury, but they will regain competence. That means the proxy would have to be removed. There are other reasons for short-term loss of competence. Some chemotherapies can cause problems. Variable mental health, where people suffer from cyclical depressions and stuff like that, could also affect competence. So just bear in mind that we may need to limit these things or review these things. We're going to talk now in detail about patients without capacity, and the reason for this is because these are the patients most at risk from proxy access of not having their rights properly managed. So bear in mind, it's always the patient's record, whether the patient is competent or not. We always have to consider the right to privacy because it is a right. Article 8 of the Human Rights, European Convention on Human Rights. Okay, we should only grant where we have evidence the proxy has a legal right to access, and or where we've got evidence that it's in the best interest of the patient. Bear in mind, you can take both of those into account. So even if they have a legal right of access, we can say no if it's not in the best interest of the patient. And don't forget to add a date for a review of capacity may be regained later, or for children particularly. So with children, okay, to re-emphasise, it's always the child's data. Age doesn't matter, it's always the child's data. It's never the parent's data. We've got to ensure the child's right to privacy is respected, okay, and children can make their own decisions when they reach Gillett competence. The Gillett competence test is really about competence. Bear in mind that if we're talking about sexual health advice, contraceptive advice, the Fraser guidelines apply here. They don't apply to other decisions, though, so bear in mind you're only looking at Gillett competence outside that area. There isn't a standard test for it. It's very much a judgment call, and therefore it should be a medical professional making the call. Also bear in mind that children can be competent in one area and not another. When we're focusing on this, we need to focus on the access to the data issues and the child's best interests. Okay, whether or not they understand what refusing or granting would mean. So let's look at what we need to consider. This is taken straight from the guidance on assessing Gillett competence. We need to take into account age, maturity, mental capacity, understanding the issue, including advantages, disadvantages, and long-term impact. They understand the risks, okay, have they thought about it, okay, how well they understand any advice they've been given, how well they understand alternative options, and their ability to explain a rationale around their reason and decision making. So they have to be able to tell us why they've made their choice. That's quite important because that shows that they have the level of maturity and understanding needed for Gillett competence. Patient adult capacity of adults, okay, it's actually slightly simpler for children because adult capacity isn't legally determined. Okay, so once you have a legal determination that someone's not competent, that's straightforward. That is basically an adult is considered competent unless there's been a court of protection decision saying they are not. Like I said, there's still a few valid LPAs, older ones, but they're now quite rare. A code of protection deputyship or LPA is needed and it must cover health and welfare, not just finance. A deputyship for finance is not valid for access to medical records. If the carers don't have this, we really need to be encouraging them to retain it because a lot of things become difficult for adults without capacity if someone hasn't got a deputyship for them. We can be at risk if the patient objects if we grant it, so we need to keep that in mind. It's unlikely, but it's a possibility. Okay. So, what does a deputyship form look like? Well, this is an example. Okay, this is actually one from my own family, okay, which obviously I've redacted, and you can see that it's a fairly straightforward document. It isn't printed on the best paper in the world, but it will have the court of protection stamp on it. It'll have a number. You can verify the number online if there is doubt as to whether or not it is a real one. Okay. It will state who the deputies are, or the joint deputies, who the person who is having deputies appointed for is, and it also states what rights the deputies have and what they can and can't do. If you are given one, make sure you look at that point part carefully and make sure that what we're doing in proxy access is allowed by the deputyship. It's very important that happens. Okay. If you need one verified and you're one of my customers, then please come to me. I can explain how to get them verified. Outside of that, if you're not a customer, the Court of Protection can verify them for you. And there are physical things on them that make it reasonably easy to verify, but they are still not too difficult to forge. So please bear in mind that they may need verification via the court. So, where do you get advice on this sort of stuff? Well, bear in mind that the GP generally, as the practitioner, always has the final say on competence of the patient safeguarding risk because they are the people that have to decide this sort of thing. Social workers involved may need to be consulted where there are safeguarding issues and with people that have competence generally. So bear in mind if there's a social worker involved, they should be consulted. Your practice codicot guardian should be consulted on patient data issues if you're not sure about data handling. They have a legal responsibility for that and they legally can say no. I as DPO can advise on data issues to those I am DPO for, but if you have a DPO, please use their advice because they can give a lot of guidance on this, and most DPOs have a lot of experience in this area. All of these can give you an independent view of the situation. So these things are not always easy. So please take advice unless it's absolutely clear cut. Now, we need to talk about big challenges and safety issues, okay? So coercive control of adults is not uncommon. We know it happens even though it's illegal. So we need to be aware of this and checking that patients are safe and that granting proxy access is not increasing their risk in any way. For children, we should only grant access to someone with parental responsibility. Now, there's a very narrow range of ways you can get parental responsibility in the UK. First one is to be named on a birth certificate as a parent. The second is to have a letter from the family, an order from the family court, which the mother has agreed to grant parental responsibility. It's got to be signed off by the family court. There is also an adverse way of doing it in the family court where the mother does not give agreement to it and the family court overrules her. Now, bear in mind that families these days are not simple. It's not mummy and daddy anymore, okay? There may be multiple parents of different genders. You can have more than two people with parental responsibility. So please bear all that in mind. Verify the parental responsibility where you can, okay? If you can't verify it, it's always going to be a judgment call, but you should be able to verify it. Obviously, people that came into the country following the birth, they may have different documentation. That can be complicated, so we need to look at that in more detail. Okay. Please be aware that children's consultations and medications may have privacy issues. The whole of the Gillett case revolved around that. Okay, and it's very, very important that children's rights to privacy are protected as well as adults. Okay, so thank you for listening. So just to summarise, any patient can have proxy access, and patients have more than one proxy. Patients must always be in charge of their proxy if they're competent. With children, we have to review at certain ages and remove access at 14. The child can then put it back on if they want. We have to remove it. Consider issues of privacy and ensure records are hidden or managed properly if necessary. Data minimization is important here, and minimize the permissions. There's some links on there for some details of how to do things and about how to get proxy access. I'll put those into the YouTube video underneath. And if any of you are looking for data protection services, then please consider us. The contact details are on YouTube, and we're always happy to look for more business. Okay, thank you very much indeed.